Do 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 do. I got semi-charmed life stuck in my head. All right. Well, the hopefully the short. I'm recording this after recording the audio for what is hopefully going to be the first new styled short video. I hope that the rapid fire montage of a bunch of different artists impressions and feelings and ideas about these cards will serve to create some sort of, I don't know, like I kind of imagine it like this cloud that roughly defines the perimeter somewhere within which there is an idea, like the idea that you recognize is in there. But I kind of like this as this, I don't know, I feel like it's like a potent attempt to get a little bit closer to maybe the heart, the core of the idea, which often I think is just beyond. I mean, things like this, tarot cards, which are, you know, creative artistic images. I don't really think there is like an objective specific word or series of words that is, you know, the proper definition for that thing. I mean, I think those words only describe some sort of a feeling that we have, some intuitive understanding, but like a pre-linguistic understanding of something. Anyways, hope you enjoyed that video. That's the direction I'm gonna be going in, and also I think I'm going to stop doing the two short videos every day. Instead of the obstacle and opportunity, I think I'm going to focus on the single cards, do that whole bombardment of tarot deck images, and I think I'm just going to try and cover kind of both the positive and negatives of each card in some depth in the longer videos. But in general, I'm always really excited to return to a card that I've already meditated on a couple weeks later and approach it with fresh eyes. I always see new stuff in them, so I'm looking forward to doing this for a long time. Anyways, let's get down to the Hanged Man. In the short, the angle that I kind of picked to approach this on was really a meta commentary. I think that would be the accurate description. Be a meta commentary on a lot of the cards in general. I think that if my understanding of history is not totally off, I feel like nowadays the contemporary interpretation of a lot of these cards, of most of the tarot cards, is really optimistic in this kind of almost generically spiritual kind of way. I've personally enjoyed reading Way of the Tarot by Alejandro Jodorowsky. He's an amazing film director, in my opinion. I find him to be an amazing film director and writer. And initially, I was really attracted to his ideas on tarot, but he seems to have this incredibly forgiving, incredibly optimistic outlook on the tarot. And I think even with some cards or some aspects of some cards that to me seem like suffering, punishment, confusion, agony, you know, he often interprets everything in this positive way. And I've come across in many books, I've come across suggestions that the tarot reader should do their best to present information in as much of a digestible and enjoyable and non-confrontational sort of way. You know, you don't want to don't freak anyone out if they draw the death card. Make sure to really quickly explain that it symbolizes change and that, and sure, you know, that could be an accurate interpretation of that card's meaning. But in general, I find there to be a pretty consistent trend of the tarot cards, in a way, being completely unable to, and this is just through a lot of readers, completely unable to address uncomfortable topics or to confront the querent, I guess, like the person getting the reading, to confront them with even a suggestion that they might be doing something wrong or they might have some ideas that are counterproductive to them, as opposed to just this kind of endless acceptance and praising. And I'm generalizing, of course, but this card in particular, I thought kind of raised those ideas in my mind, and so I went with that kind of. I was trying to make it a little bit comical too, and a little like tongue in cheek, but yeah, this was the historical. I think historically, people would look at this, a couple hundred years ago. They would look at this, and the first thing they would think is, this is a traitor, because it was very common in the, the way you dealt with traitors is you hung them by the foot. That was just this obvious aspect of their culture. So I found it kind of really interesting that with that meaning being completely lost and often replaced with these very profound spiritual, like, this is a great person, this is a wise individual, as opposed to ever interpreting this as like, this is someone who did some fucked up shit and now they're paying for it, and this is torture, and this is not meant to be an enlightening inversion of perspective that opens their eyes to a new thing. And of course it also is those things, but yeah, I just largely wanted to draw on the contrast, and in that sense it kind of made me think about how in general often people will spend a lot of time coming up with ways to define or redefine what they're doing in life to get the kind of life that they want, to get the kind of results that they want, as opposed to investing maybe an equal amount of energy into actually living differently. So a lot of people, for instance, will I don't know, drink heavily and do irresponsible things while drunk, but then and they'll regret it. They won't feel comfortable with it. They'll often think back on the night before and just be filled with this cringe-inducing regret and embarrassment. But as opposed to investing their energy into trying to overcome that, it's very often it's an addiction. It's one of the most difficult things to overcome. But nonetheless, instead of focusing their energies there, they focus their energies on trying to figure out how to put a spin, a public relations story that makes it seem like that thing is acceptable, perfectly understandable, relatable, maybe even desirable, as opposed to, and it's like this card. It's like, we're not looking at a traitor who is being, tortured and punished for the horrible things that they did, for their betrayal, right? It's like, no, this is a person who is doing this thing that's like enlightened, and they're just, and yeah, so it just kind of reminded me of all the kind of excuses, justifications, rationalizations that people come up with to dress up their own situation. And some people are in a rough situation and it has nothing to do with the way they've been living their life. In fact, I think that's a lot of people. A lot of people try, they make an effort, and still, life is hard, and there's a lot of randomness and chaos, and often you could try really, really hard, and still it seems like you don't make a dent. But there are also people who have, a fucked up life, who are suffering or dangling in some way, and it's directly related to their actions. It's directly related to some choices that they made. And in general, with the major arcana, with these 22 cards that the Hanged Man belongs to. I personally like to use these as kind of like a mirror, like a conceptual mirror. I like to look at these cards and think to myself, this is me. And not in a way that I should recognize this or that makes sense to me, but I like to interpret these cards as being reflections of me as I am perceived by others, right? So it kind of, I don't know, it's an exercise that's meant to inspire self-reflection, but from an angle that it maybe isn't usually considered, right? If you reflect on your life and where you're at, generally in the relatively short term kind of period of time, we usually have this kind of like de facto presumption of how people we know see us, and and generally that's a fantasy in no small part sculpted by our ego and our subconscious mind to make us feel valuable to ourselves and make us feel good about ourselves and to approve of ourselves. So I like to take these cards and ask myself, okay, if this is if this is the way that some people see me as being this card. Like, what does that mean? Is it Do they see me as someone who is lazy but dresses up their laziness in some sort of spiritual activity? I'm not sitting around. I'm not just dangling around. I put myself here. I tied myself up, and I'm not just laying around. I'm hanging upside down because it's this profound thing that I do to gain a new perspective on life. Like, do they see me as the kind of person who makes up these stories that are just obviously a veneer on top of what the actual thing is, right? Um, and yeah, and it could it could be a little harsh sometimes. That's just one interpretation. Also, I mean, there's also positive interpretations of each of the cards. Like, I really like this card and the High Priestess, both like second degree cards, like number two cards. They both have a very strong theme of stillness that nonetheless, I believe, accomplishes something. And one of the things that I find interesting about this card is it kind of reminds me of the sentiment in that saying, even a broken watch is still right twice a day. Like, if you wait if you wait long enough, the time will synchronize up with the broken watch that is still and not moving. And with this, I kind of like to focus on the fact that these two trees that are supporting that horizontal piece that he's tied to, it looks like they've had their branches trimmed off close to the trunk. There's 12 of them. To some people, that's significant. Um, but nonetheless, I kind of get the feeling that those trees are still alive. Like, they're not uprooted. The soil that they're planted in is green and fertile and lush, and the trees themselves are, they're yellow, enlightened. The cuts are full of this red vital blood, or that's kind of the way that I intuit those colors. And so yeah, I don't know. Often I look at this card and I imagine those trees slowly growing and lifting this individual higher and higher, and that even in this incredibly compromised state, this person's patience is something that over time is an extremely virtuous quality. And that's another way that I could see this card being a reflection of me. I'm sometimes sometimes I'm so virtuously patient, it's it's at the point of being a fault. Like, it can almost be too easy for me at times to just feel comfortable waiting things out. And sometimes it's over a long period of time where, like, epochs of my life go by and I'm just happy to wait for a trend to come back around instead of actively pursuing it. Hot fashion tip, by the way. Hot fashion tip. If you don't want to, if you don't want to spend too much money on always keeping up with the latest fashions, just keep one style around and wait, and then roughly every 7 to 12 years, you'll you'll be at the cutting edge avant-garde once that fashion starts like slipping back into the mainstream. Um, but but yeah, so a lot of interpretations. Uh, consider how this, consider how the major arcana cards like the Hanged Man could be interpreted as the way that other people see you. And in terms of imagining how other people see you, I would argue that there's more practical use. I'm not going to say whether it's a lot more or just a little bit more, but I get the feeling there's more practical use to considering how others, to considering how people in your life could think of you as something that is a little to the less good side of average opinions. Because at least that allows for the opportunity to potentially identify and recognize some faults or hangups or whatever, and then proactively address them, as opposed to just immediately presuming that everybody thinks you're the greatest thing ever and nothing about you ever needs to change, and so on and so forth. But yeah, and I'd be curious to know how you think that this might, in what way do you think this might symbolize you? In what way do you feel like you could see yourself reflected in this as your friends, your family members, people you're in relationships with, as those people might see you? Actually, I wonder if I could. Yeah, see, it's a little difficult to see his face too, but he's got an interesting face. It looks like he's got this kind of smug look, a little bit of smugness. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna wrap things up there. Hope you enjoyed the video. Drop me a like if you did. Feel free to comment free reading to be entered into this coming week's draw. I just put out the first draw. It's like a Wheel of Fortune winner draw. It was pretty cool. I just found some website that has this spinny wheel thing. Congratulations to the winner. I can't remember now. Natasha Honeypot, I believe. Congratulations. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for commenting. And yeah, I'll be back with another video tomorrow. I'll talk to you then. Take care.